Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
Hi there, it's Mathew Blades, and welcome to what I think is our 80th podcast of Learn from People Who Lived It. That's incredible. Thank you for being along for the ride. Today's subject matter is one that you don't hear every day. A man who's been raped. Blake's about to set the stage on that event, talk about his suicidal ideations, but then ultimately pass along some tools and the reason he was able to come out of his depression. And it was one 5-letter word: humor. A joke, one night on a TV show, saved his life. What was that joke? Well, we'll find out in this episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
I'm Blake, and I'm 53 years old.
Blake, what story are you here to share today?
The hope is I inspire people and excite people and even entertain people a little bit as I share this story of how I've overcome rape. Yeah.
Well, who do you hope hears this then?
Well, I mean, especially I hope a lot of boys and men hear this because society makes it pretty tough for guys like me to talk about stuff like this. And so I really especially hope a lot of boys and men hear this and take something away from this.
I want to welcome everybody to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It. We are going to take a really interesting turn because you're right. What you just said, Blake, is so true. When we speak of rape, we almost always, probably 99% of the time, we think of a woman and an experience that she had. But for you, back in 2011, you were raped, and I know that we're going to go down that hole today. We're going to talk about that experience and kind of what led up to it, what is happening now. But before we jump into all of that stuff, let's get to know a little bit about you, Blake, right here in 2022. What's the status of your life right now, some 11 years after this horrible event? How are things for you in this moment?
Well, I mean, I'm still here. It sounds like such a cliche to say, but I am still here. That wasn't a given. I mean, I've been through so many suicidal moments. I did try to take my life once a few years back. So, I mean, I'm here, and I'm an artist now. I've been creating this art. It's called social practice artwork through the interactions I've had with tens of thousands of people. And so my life is really different than it was a decade ago. In some ways, it seems that I'm still days after just the rape, but it's been a decade. But again, I look at my life and I just think, I'm happy I'm here. I'm happy. I have to look at the things that I do have, not the things I don't have. And so that's where I'm at today.
Blake, I want to ask you a question. When I mentioned up front that when we speak of rape, it's usually women that we target, it does happen to men too. In your education along the way, what kind of numbers are we talking about? How many men are raped in a year? How common is this, or how uncommon is this?
I mean, I've seen statistics from different the statistics can vary a little bit, but some of the numbers I'm seeing show it happens equally as it does to women. It's just we're not hearing about it. But again, some of that too goes into the domestic abuse part of it. I'm also a survivor of that because what I went through was it wasn't just rape, it was domestic abuse. But some of the statistics, they're not completely caught up yet because it's just an area that people don't. It's almost like the universe, like we're just finding out what's way out there in the universe. And in some ways with rape, with men, it's sort of like that. We're just finding out what's truly out there and we're exploring it and we're starting to understand that it's pretty significant. But again, when boys and men don't talk about it, it makes it pretty hard to identify. So again, some places are saying it's happening maybe just as equally as what it's happening with females.
When it happened to you, man, and let's just dive right in. That's what we like to do here on our show is, get into these details. So when it happened to you in 2011, how long did it take you to want to talk about it?
This is what made my situation really unusual is I actually made a 911 call while it was happening. And there's even a transcript of the dispatcher from 911. She heard the rape live. And there's actually, to this day, I mean, there's a public record of what she heard. She was documenting it, which could have been, honestly, the last moments of my life. And it's pretty chilling when you read it. So I was speaking up that night. A large group of officers showed up that night. And I mean, if you can fancy this, it's I'm in my home on the 7th floor, downtown Phoenix. I have 4 police officers standing around me, 3 perpetrators that had just done this to me. It's a bloody crime scene, broken furniture. I'm in torn, bloody underwear that I put back on. That's it. I'm basically standing there naked, bleeding, injured, and the police did nothing. And later on, I got an apology from some senior members of the Phoenix Police Department at a formal meeting saying they treated me differently because I was a gay man. And that was hard for me. So I did speak about it right away. And then for the next couple of days, I spoke about it. And then I completely shut down, because at some point you have 7 people standing around you and they tell you that what I know happened didn't happen. There's something that just clicks in your brain. And the doctors that worked with me over time said it's called dissociative amnesia. The memory was there. It's just like a mirror that's broken and it's cracked in all these pieces. And that's what they said happened to me, is that at some point that mirror was going to be put back together. And it did. It was put back together at some point. But I spoke out about it. Like, that's what made my situation so unusual, is that there was a 911 call. I did tell people that night. I told one of my best friends the next morning what happened. And, you know, I did everything you're supposed to do. Everything people want you to do in a rape. And it didn't work out, you know, because I was a different kind of person. I wasn't, you know, they said later on, people that the police said, you know, they weren't used to dealing with men that were involved in this. And then on top of that, to be a gay man. And that's tough. Yeah.
I'm listening to you talk right now, and here's what I'm imagining in my mind. These officers, they show up, I'm assuming they're men, but maybe they weren't. And they walk in, and, you know, there's these other gentlemen, and maybe this is the first time that they've ever rolled up on a scene like this. They've never even seen this before. And it is an interesting, and not in a good way, it's an interesting thing there, that because they walk in and because you guys are part of the gay community, they feel like there's a different set of rules there. They feel like there's a different way to handle these things there. And when you talk about rape as a word, I mean, it doesn't really boil down to consent. And you didn't consent to this event taking place. Am I right?
No. Yeah. And I fought. And, you know, I felt like if you've ever seen the movie, a lot of times I'll make references to songs, movies, books, because it's something we can all relate to. But that movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe, I just, when I looked back on that night, I just imagined I was the gladiator in that movie. And Russell Crowe, I was trying to hold these guys off, you know, and I was very sick that night. That's why I was in bed. How I held the guys off, a lot of doctors said it was more than likely adrenaline. And, you know, you only have so much adrenaline, but until the police arrived, I held these guys off. They were like a bunch of tigers, like wild animals coming at me, and I was fending them off. And then even when the rape was occurring, it's counterintuitive, but you know, in the bed when it was happening, the best way I could describe it to people was being caught in a riptide. You know, I grew up around like the South Shore of Chicago, Lake Michigan. I would go to all the time with my buddies. If there was a riptide, they always told you, swim parallel to shore. Don't swim back toward shore, because the riptide will kill you. It's too powerful. And at some point during the rape, I sat there and allowed it to happen, meaning I fought, but the harder I fought, the worse it was getting. So I waited until one of the guys' weight shifted in a certain direction. But that was the counterintuitive part of it. I had to swim parallel to shore that night so I could survive at least the bed part of it. The details of that were horrific. It was tough. It was
a tough night. Yeah. And am I correct to assume that you knew these gentlemen in some way?
I did, actually. Yeah. It shocks a lot of people. There was a time, people were shocked to find out one of the three perpetrators had been my domestic partner of almost a decade. When you start drinking or using drugs or potentially both, people become very different, but they still have to, there's accountability. If you choose to drink, you have to be accountable for your actions, even with whatever happens. But one of the people involved had been my domestic partner of almost a decade. And then I knew the other two people, and my ex-partner of all those years, he let the guys in. So that made it really hard for me. That's when I was diagnosed with the PTSD. The biggest issue I had was trusting human beings again, because this individual that had been my partner, I trusted him.
Let me ask you a question. How soon after that you start talking about it, after this suicidal episode, do you find out that you're not alone, that there's other people that are kind of in maybe not the exact same situation from a detail standpoint, but they're in a similar place where they've been violated, they've been betrayed? Because, as Dr. Frank will always say, like, the themes in all of our episodes are very universal, right? Betrayal, abuse, that, these are themes that are very present in a lot of traumatic experiences. And so was a piece of your healing, Blake, found in other folks and just knowing that you weren't alone?
It did. It came, and over that, after I had attempted my life, it was May 30th, 2015. I got a little bit better. I felt like, all right, I started talking about it, but then there was a period of time where I went back to this dark, depressed place. I spiraled, and that was about 6 months later, 5 or 6 months later. It was right after that moment, because then I ran into a suicidal night, early November 2015, and it was something that happened that night. I did have a moment of laughter on that suicidal night, and that's what started me completely on this journey to open up to a lot of people, a lot. And that, you're right, Matthew, that's when I started hearing stories from these tens of thousands of strangers I've met now over the last 7 years. They started opening up to me, not just their verbal stories, they're written. I have all these written stories from 32,101 people. And in hundreds of those cases, they're guys. They're talking about that they've been raped. And in a couple dozen of those cases, they never told anybody, ever. I was the first person. Very powerful. Anything from a 15 and 16-year-old kid up to guys in their 60s talking about rape for the first time. It's one of those things. Once you open up to somebody and you're vulnerable, there's a high likelihood somebody's going to open up to you. And that's when I started really seeing, like, wow, like, this is incredible.
Well, what happens in these situations, it's become my experience as we've talked to now 70 plus people who are shared their stories courageously about what happened to them, is that when we go through these moments of trauma, there's a certain set of beliefs that get set up in that moment about you and about who you are and about all of the things. And, I've talked probably too much about the fact that when my father passed away, so my big traumatic moment was when I was 23 years old, my father dropped dead in front of me, and I tried to save his life and I couldn't. And so there was a whole set of beliefs, Blake, that got set up in that moment. Things like, you don't know enough. Things like, you're not good enough. All of these things started to happen to me. And then self-doubt starts to play out. Boy, you start asking yourself some questions. And then people don't realize that enters every other arena and aspect of your life. Like, I would be in a meeting at work where I clearly knew right from wrong, better from suck, all the things. And that belief system would show itself, and it would say, you don't know enough. Stop talking. And that's how these things creep into your life. That's how a moment like my experience, like your experience, that's how it comes back in. And I can only imagine for you that after that, you had a certain set of beliefs set up in your own mind about who you were, why that happened to you, and all of the things that came with it. Am I wrong about that?
You question everything. You're right. I mean, you question everything. I think there's a part when you move past, I guess in some ways it's like the stages of grief. You realize, wow, this did happen. And then you start questioning. I know I spoke in front of an audience, I can't remember where, but I remember somebody raised their hand and said, where would you go back and change your life? And I said, well, why do you think I would want to change my life? I was just curious. And she said, you were raped. Like, why would you not want to go back and change that? And I said, well, how do I know if I remove the rape, something much worse wouldn't have happened to me? So I do have a lot of questions, Mathew. And I wondered, everything, from why did it happen? What could I have done differently? But I stopped asking those questions and thought, it did happen. So I don't want to live my life in the past. I want to live it today. And sometimes people will not understand somebody that's gone through something I have gone through to think, but you're still thinking about it. Of course I am. I mean, as I told you before we got on here, I just finished up my 9th round of physical therapy. I mean, these have been grueling physical therapy sessions. Sometimes they take 2 to 4 months each. Every year since the rape, I've had to go through this grueling physical therapy because I have flare-ups, I have problems. So sometimes when people say, but stop thinking about the past, that rape is still happening to me today. I have the guys who come after me in cars, friends of these guys that have tried to run me over in downtown. I've had 400 harassing phone calls come in during April of last year. Law enforcement got involved. So sometimes people, if they don't understand fully the puzzle that is your rape or your trauma, then if they're missing a few pieces of that puzzle, they may not be able to see a complete picture. And so I never want people to feel sorry for me. Just understand my story before you critique it.
You can spend your whole life wondering why. You're going to drive yourself absolutely crazy trying to answer that question. And as far as I can tell, right, and my dad died in 1996, so I've had a lot of time to think about this. And I am definitive with my answer. The reason we go through these things is so we can help somebody else. That's it. That's your why right there. And you seem to have landed on that, right? You're speaking about it. You're getting loud about it. You're letting other people know they're not alone. That's the power of you going. Now you have the power of the moment. Now you hold that power, not them anymore. You're the one using the magnitude of that moment for good. And that's really where we have to get people to, because, hurt people. I believe healed people can heal people. And, I don't know that you declare yourself healed. I don't know if I declare myself healed, but I am in many ways. I've figured out what my tools are in and around those moments. And so I want to ask you specifically about your tools, because we have such a great opportunity to learn from you, Blake. And so when let's say you wake up, okay, it's a normal day, you're getting yourself together, you're going to have some breakfast, and then boom, that highlight reel starts playing of that night. And it goes through you. And what are your tools now to deal with that? How do you cycle through the emotions? Because you can't ignore them. You have to feel them. What are you doing?
Well, when I wake up, I have to find a way to wake up and say, all right, you got to do something. And I try to get one thing accomplished, because once you get one thing accomplished, it starts rolling. So sometimes it's just opening up the blinds and seeing the sunshine, or just letting the light in. And that's a start. Sometimes it's just going in and shaving. And then, once you get something going, boom, it starts rolling a little bit easier. So that's what I have to start each day. But the thing that's helped me the most is I now have a purpose. I don't know if you want me to go into this yet, but I have a purpose. I have a goal every day. It's been a really hard goal to get to. This stems back to that November 2nd, 2015 night. It was right about 10:45 at night. And that's when I was going to take my life. And I woke up from another nightmare that night, and I was done. That night I was done. I just said, this ends tonight. Because for some reason, that September and October leading up, it was almost every night I'd go through these nightmares, and I couldn't understand it. It was like somebody was beating me, and I just thought, I've got to end it. So when I woke up, I got out the pills, I put them on my lap, I got the water bottle, but there was one thing that was very amiss. I looked over at the television, and it was on, and every night I set the timer. And I'd go to bed. Sometimes I'd sleep an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, and then wake up to the nightmare. But this night I looked at the television, and I was very confused. I actually thought maybe I was still in the nightmare, because I thought, why is this on? So at that moment, there was a comedy show. It's called the Late Show with Stephen Colbert. and something made me laugh. And I paused the show, and it was that moment. That was the defining moment of my life. Not the rape, that. Because I felt, here I am, I look down at the pills, and I leave it up to people when I tell this story what they think. I know what I think. I'm Catholic. I still identify as Catholic. I felt like it was a higher power at play, because that moment of laughter stopped me. And I promised myself, I paused the show and said, I'm going to get on the show someday and I'm going to tell my story. I'm not going to hide anymore. I will tell my story. And then it was a couple days later, the whole idea of how I'd tell my story, how I'd get on the show came to fruition. I mean, here it is 7 years later, I haven't got on the show. But when you ask me, Mathew, what do I do every day to help me get through this? It's that. I have this purpose. I have this goal. And now I've got all these tens of thousands of people that I've walked up to, these total strangers all over the country. And I've told them my story. They've shared back with me and they said, hey, we hope you get on the Late Show someday. You share your story. And now I've got all their stories on almost 500 giant foam poster boards. It's incredible. So someday when I get on the show as a guest, I can take the stories of 32,101 strangers with me. To me, that's going to be the most profound moment, because that's how I've been getting through it. Every day I say, keep going. Do one thing to try and get yourself on the show. I know there was a reason that moment happened that night. And to tell you how powerful that moment of hope, that esperanza was that night, I'm still doing it. Like, I don't get paid to do this. Like, I go out every day and I work to meet people and talk about getting on the show. So, I mean, that's my purpose. I think everybody has to find that purpose. What drives them? What's their dream? And for me, this is something that's helping me recover. And it's also allowing me to meet, like, wow, the things that have happened on this journey across the country. Yeah, I haven't got on this show yet, but like, it's been a heck of an odyssey, and it's going to keep going until I do.
As we wind down a little bit, Blake, I want to talk about your TED Talk in a sec, but I want to really hammer home a couple of things that I've written down as you and I have been talking, and they are about the tools, specifically the tools. And you said a couple of things that I just love so much that I want to reiterate them, which is, I asked you when you were in that really tough spot, what were your tools? And you said one really simple thing. You said, I would just open up the windows and I would let the light in. And I thought, gosh, it's such a great, simple answer. And then you said, I would just decide that I was going to shave. And I loved that answer even more. And I'll tell you why I connected with it was because when I was really at the height of my depression in 2018, 2019, and getting into things, you stop taking care of yourself. You stop letting the light in, metaphorically and literally. And they're just two small adjustments that people can make in their lives. And they start to slowly turn the tide. My friend Chris Powell talks about it all the time. He's a transformation expert when it comes to fitness. And, people that want to lose weight, he's like, I don't necessarily send them to the gym. I just tell them to start drinking a bottle of water a day. It's a little thing that starts to make a big shift. And so I really wanted to just mention that again, harp on that again, to say that if you are in a tough spot right now, stop thinking about this enormous, like you could have said, well, I want to be on the Stephen Colbert show. That's my tool. I got my sight set on it. It's like, well, okay, that's lofty. That's huge. That's big. You can't put that into practice today, but you can put into practice taking care of myself. I'm going to laugh today. I'm going to go see my friends for lunch. I'm going to make an appointment to go get my nails done, or, you know what I mean? I just love that you had those simplistic tools that you shared with us. So let's talk about your TED Talk, man. How did that come to be? What did you talk about? I want to hear all about it.
That came to be pretty much like everything in my journey. It's just terribly unexpected. The beautiful, the spontaneity. When I would go out all these days and just meet strangers and walk up to them with my giant boards and say, hey, I'm Blake. I'm trying to get on the Late Show. Can I tell you my story? Two of the people I met at a coffee shop, Songbird Coffee, right in downtown Phoenix. It's my old neighborhood. I had lived there many years. And anyway, I walked up and there were these two, turns out they're two students at Grand Canyon University. And they both looked at each other with like little sheepish smiles. they had signed the boards, they hugged me, and then they looked at each other and said, before you leave, they had like a little whisper to each other, and they said, can we nominate you for a TEDx talk? And I honestly, this was about 6 years ago, I had heard about these things. I didn't know much about them. I mean, I didn't. And I said, sure. And they explained more about what I would do if I got chosen. And it turns out they had about 25 of their fellow students. They all voted, and I was one of the people chosen. So they nominated me, and I had to learn about this over a few months. And yeah, I mean, it's different. I mean, you're going to be up in front of a bunch of people. You're telling your story. And in this case, it was going to be emotional. But it was also showing people a different way to get through a trauma, because sometimes in life, there's this expectation that it's going to just counselors and medication. And I think there are a lot of different ways to get through it. And what I was trying to show people is, for me, the medications didn't work very well. They were bad. And everybody has to make that decision with their doctors, with their team, their family. They didn't work well for me. The talk therapy was helpful, but there was nothing like, I called it the social engagement therapy. When I go out and meet all these strangers every day with this goal in mind, that was the most beneficial thing for me, because again, it was the vulnerability. And Mathew, what it was doing every day, I was getting out of the house for 4 to 6 hours a day to meet these people. So I was getting out. And so when I came home every day, this is what I shared in the TEDx, is that I'd look at these boards and say, oh my gosh, I have proof that I met all these people today. Look at all this accomplishment. So if I met 38 people that day and they signed stories and messages on my boards, I could see that I accomplished that. And then I would read those at night, like 38 Hallmark cards that night. And it was amazing. So that was the TEDx talk that I gave, was there is another way to get through trauma. It's not always, we have to find our way. You know, again, if talk therapy, counseling works, great. If medication, if it's a matrix approach, or if it's like me, if somebody wanted to emulate what I've done, gosh, I would be more than happy for people like to Google like information about me and find out. But that's what I gave the TEDx talk about, is just this really, they said it was a very innovative way, but it was, to me, it didn't seem innovative. It seemed like it fit me like a shoe, like the shoe that I was supposed to have, and it worked. And I hope everybody finds that. So take that first step, whatever it is. If you take a step and it's not what you need, then find something else. Keep going. I think that's the key thing. You know, it's like one step at a time. In Spanish, un día a la vez, just a day at a time. You know, whatever it takes. And that was the tenor of the TEDx talk.
I love just about everything that's come out of your mouth today, Blake. I can't thank you enough for being a guest on Learn from People Who Lived It. And there's so much to learn from you. And I'm going to harp on it, but the tools, I thought that was tremendous. The thing you just said about how everybody's got to find a way to deal with their trauma their way. And I share the sentiment with you. I'm somebody who tried talk therapy. I tried pills. I tried a lot of things. And for me, I found I needed a spiritual movement. That's inevitably what I ended up needing, was almost this entire shift in mindset to say that all happened to you, but now you are not that person. You're not that person anymore. You know, you were 23 when that happened. You were 9 when that happened. You were 6 when that happened. You're not 6, 9, and 23 anymore. You know, you're a 48-year-old man, and it's time to be in this moment right here. And that's just such powerful words for people to hear who are struggling. I just know it is, because I remember the darkest days, and I remember feeling like it was never going to get better. And you probably remember that too. And now, I mean, all these years later, aren't you so glad you put the pills down? I
am. And you know, it's interesting. You didn't ask me this, Mathew, and well, I'm not hoping you ask me this, but I know sometimes where I've spoken, this comes up. Well, it actually comes up a lot. People ask, what was the joke that made you laugh that night so you didn't take those pills when the Late Show was on? And I told people, and I still tell people to this day, it's the same story. I don't know what the joke was. And it shocks people. Like, well, this is the most powerful moment of your life. It stops you from killing yourself, and you don't know what the joke is. And I said, no. And I said, but you're missing the point of that moment. It wasn't what was coming into me that night, the joke. It was what was leaving me, my laughter. Because that night when I laughed, I realized there was something good left in me. And that was the most powerful moment of my life, that I am in this dark place. I'm all by myself in that room. And all of a sudden, something came out of me that was just so incredibly unexpected, laughter. And I knew that moment there was still something good left in me. And I hope whoever's listening to this today, Mathew, that realizes there is still something good left inside of you. And it's in you. It was in me that night. It took a moment to pull it out of me. So just know this, whoever's listening to this, there's something good left inside of you.
I'm going to do everything in my power to help you get on that Stephen Colbert show. I wish you all the best in the future, Blake, and consider me an ally. If there's any way you think I might be able to help, I hope you'll let me know. And I know we're all really grateful for you sharing your tale with us today. And we're sorry that it happened to you, but we're really, really glad that you've turned it into what you have and have used this as a force to help other people feel less alone and encourage them to share their story, which you know is the fundamental piece of what we're doing here on Learn from People Who Lived It. Thank you very much for being here.
You're welcome, Mathew, and thank you for letting me share this.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1, to help you feel less alone. 2, encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3, when you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word, Learn from People Who Lived It.